The moment investigators began to treat Lynn Hernan's death as suspicious, the story peeled back like the layers of an onion, revealing not just a single tragedy, but a pattern of deception that stretched far deeper than anyone could have guessed. At first, authorities thought they were looking at a caregiver who had taken advantage of a vulnerable friend. Finances, a classic case of fraud with a lethal ending. But as they retraced Jesse Kerchevsky's steps in the weeks and months leading up to Hernan's death, the details became darker, the paper trail heavier, and the lies more elaborate. Detectives learned that Kerchevsky wasn't just dipping into Hernan's accounts. She was bleeding them dry, moving money around like a shell game and covering her tracks with forged checks, false explanations, and a charm offensive designed to make Hernan believe she was indispensable. It became clear that the poisoning wasn't just a sudden, impulsive act of desperation. It was the climax of a long, calculated scheme. Investigators sat with Hernan's closest friends and family members who recalled how the older woman had complained of feeling unwell in the months before her death, often chalking it up to stress or minor ailments. But when detectives began connecting the dots, it looked less like natural illness and more like the early stages of systematic poisoning. This was where the real horror crept in. The possibility that Kerchevsky had been testing doses, slipping eye drops into food or drinks over time, weakening her victim slowly until the final fatal amount. Forensic experts explained to the jury later how tetrahydrozoline works in the body, noting that the substance doesn't metabolize quickly, meaning repeated exposures can build toxicity. In other words, this may not have been a single drop in a glass one fateful night. It could have been weeks or months of careful administration, turning something as harmless as a glass of water or cup of coffee into a slow-acting time bomb. Detectives couldn't ignore the parallels to classic Black Widow cases, where caregivers or spouses poison their victims over long stretches, maintaining control while eliminating them inch by inch. The psychological element fascinated and disturbed criminologists who later studied the case. What kind of mind does it take to watch someone you know and claim to care about suffer day by day, all while pretending to nurse them back to health? The greed element was undeniable. Kerchevsky was drowning in debt, desperate for money, and living beyond her means with purchases that seemed impossible on her actual income. But greed alone didn't fully explain the cold patience of the act. When police pressed her in interviews, she denied everything, often crying, playing the role of a devastated friend, insisting that Hernan must have taken her own life, pointing to the staged scene of pills and alcohol. But detectives weren't buying it, and they had science on their side. The toxicology report, combined with the financial motive, gave them what they needed to reclassify the case as homicide, and in December 2019, just over a year after Hernan's death, Kerchevsky was arrested. News of the charges hit local media like a thunderclap. Death by eye drops was a headline so bizarre, so unprecedented, that it traveled well beyond Wisconsin, making its way into national outlets and catching the attention of true crime junkies across the country. Yet the arrest was just the beginning, because the real battle was still ahead in court. Kerchevsky's defense would be that Hernan had taken the substance herself, either intentionally or accidentally, and they pointed to the presence of the Vicine bottle near her body as supposed proof. But prosecutors countered with an avalanche of evidence: the drained accounts, the forged checks, the suspicious medical symptoms, the implausibility of someone intentionally drinking enough eye drops to cause death, and the cold fact that Hernan had never been suicidal, never expressed that kind of despair, and had every reason to live. To strengthen their case, detectives dug into Kerchevsky's past, and while she had no prior homicide record, she had a history of financial misdeeds and manipulative behavior that painted her as someone willing to bend morals until they snapped. The prosecution also emphasized the calculated nature of the crime, how difficult it would be for an ordinary person to even conceive of using eye drops as poison, let alone acquire the knowledge of dosage, method, and timing. This wasn't a reckless act of rage. It was premeditated, clinical, almost experimental. The more the state revealed, the more the public became obsessed with the case, because unlike so many homicides involving guns, knives, or blunt objects, this was a murder weapon that lived in plain sight in countless households, a reminder that evil sometimes hides in the smallest, most ordinary places. And as 2020 turned to 2021, and the world grappled with the pandemic, true crime fans found themselves returning to this story again and again, fascinated by its mixture of suburban banality and chilling ingenuity. It was a case that forced people to confront the terrifying thought that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't a stranger lurking outside your window, but the bottle of clear liquid sitting quietly in your cabinet, waiting for the wrong person to see it as opportunity.